The savannah had gone unnaturally quiet. Not the gentle quiet of dawn when the grass still holds the night as breath. Not the calm caused before rain. This was a silence that pressed against the ears, heavy and watchful, as if the land itself had stopped moving to observe what would happen next. Daniel Manji felt it before he understood it. Moments earlier, the African plains had been alive with sound, sick as rattling in the heat, distant bird calls, the low hum of wind sliding through dry grass. Then, without warning, everything vanished. No insects, no birds. Even the wind seemed to pull back. His instincts tightened. Daniel slowed his pace, his boots sinking softly into the sun-baked snorts earth as he scanned the tall grass ahead. Years as a park ranger in the Messiah, Mara had trained him to read silence the way others read science. "Are you all right?" Silence meant a predator nearby, unbelievable, or danger of another kind. The radio clipped to his shoulder. Music crackled once, then fell dead. Of course, he muttered under his breath. The heat was brutal, pressing down on his spine like a physical weight. Sweat ran into his eyes as he adjusted the strap of his rifle. More a symbol of authority than a tool he ever wanted to use. Daniel had joined the Rangers to protect life, not take it. That morning, he had followed tracks, human tracks. They were careless, fresh, and unmistakable. Poachers again. In the past month alone, 2 elephants had been found mutilated, and a lioness pregnant had bled out in the dust after stepping into a wire snare. Daniel could still see her eyes when he closed his own. Heat swallowed hard and pushed forward. The grass ahead parted just enough for him to see a cluster of acacia trees rising from the plain like broken spears. Shadows pulled beneath them, dark and inviting, too inviting. His pulse quickened as he spotted something glinting faintly near the ground. Wire. He crouched, careful, reaching toward what looked like a rusted snare, half buried beneath dust and brittle grass. Whoever said it knew exactly what they were doing. The loop was positioned perfectly invisible, unless you were looking for it. Daniel exhaled slowly. That was when the ground disappeared. There was no warning, no time to react. The earth simply collapsed beneath his weight, and the world flipped violently upside down. He felt the pit was shallow but vicious, sharpened wooden stakes jutted upward like teeth. Daniel hit hard, pain exploding through his leg as one of the spikes tore into his thigh. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, and his scream ripped out of him before he could stop it. The sound echoed across the empty savannah. Then came the pain, white, blinding, all-consuming. Daniel clutched his leg, his fingers slick with blood. Almost immediately, his vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges as he tried to force himself to breathe. The smell of iron filled his nose, blood. His heart hammered as realization set in. Blood meant predators. He tried to move, but the moment he shifted his weight, agony surged through his body. His injured leg refused to obey, screaming in protest. Gritting his teeth, Daniel dragged himself toward the edge of the pit, fingers clawing desperately. A loose soul. His radio was gone, either smashed in the fall or lost somewhere in the dust. Panic crept in, cold and invasive. The sun was already tilting westward. Night would come soon, and with it the true rulers of this land. Lions, hyenas, leopards, creatures that could smell blood from miles away. Daniel leaned his head back against the dirt wall, forcing himself to think. He had faced danger before: armed poachers, charging buffalo, venomous snakes, but this was different. This was helplessness, stripped of control, stripped of options. With a strangled grunt, he made one last attempt to pull himself free. His fingers caught a root near the edge, and with everything he had left, he hauled himself upward, collapsing onto the surface in a cloud of dust. He didn't stand. He couldn't. Instead, he crawled inch by agonizing inch toward the thin shade of a nearby acacia tree. By the time he reached it, his body trembled violently, dehydration and blood loss conspiring to pull him under. Daniel collapsed onto his back. The sky above him shimmered impossibly blue. His breathing grew shallow. That was when he heard a low, resonant sound, deep, vibrating through the ground more than the air, a growl. Every muscle in his body went rigid. Through blurred vision, Daniel saw movement at the edge of the clearing, golden shapes emerging from the tall grass, slow and deliberate, massive forms that carried both grace and undeniable power, lions of full pride. A male stepped forward first, his dark mane catching the dying sunlight, eyes fixed on the motionless man beneath the tree. Behind him, a lioness paused, her body tense, protect of a small cub peering out from between her legs. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. This was it. He knew the rules of the wild. An injured animal or man was prey. The smell of blood alone should have sealed his fate. His instincts screamed at him to move, to fight, to do something, but his body refused. The male lion circled him, slowly paused, silent on the dust. Daniel could see every detail, the scars along the lioness flank, the twitch of his whiskers, the rise and fall of his powerful chest. The lion stopped, sniffed. Daniel closed his eyes, bracing for impact. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. When he dared to look again, the lion was no longer advancing. Instead, he sat down a few paces away, watching, not hunting, watching. The lioness followed suit, settling beside her cub. The savannah remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was waiting, and in that suspended moment, leading broken, surrounded by the very predators he had spent his life protecting, Daniel Monji realized something that made his breath catch in disbelief. The lions were not attacking him. They were staying, as if standing guard. Daniel Monji did not dare move. The lions were close enough now that he could hear them breathe. Slow, measured, powerful. Each exhale carried the weight of muscle and instinct honed over generations. That male's chest expanded and felt like a living engine. And with every rise, Daniel expected the sudden explosion of movement, the final charge that would end everything, but it never came. Instead, the lioness' eyes stayed on him, not the sharp, predatory focus Daniel had seen countless times while tracking prides from a safe distance, not the cold calculation of a hunter locking onto prey. These eyes were different. They studied rather than stalked, observed rather than pursued. That terrified him more than aggression ever could. His mind raced, scrambling for explanations that refused to form. Injured animals behaved unpredictably. He knew that predators sometimes delayed an attack, conserving energy. Sometimes they played with prey. Sometimes they waited for darkness. The sun was already sinking, smearing the horizon with copper and gold. Daniel's mouth was so dry his tongue felt like sandpapered. He tried to swallow and failed. His leg throbbed in relentless pulses, each beat sending fresh pain through his body. Blood soaked into the dirt beneath him, and he knew the scent was unmistakable. Yet the lions did nothing. The male shifted his weight, massive paws pressing into the earth. Daniel flinched, his body tensing instinctively despite his injury. The lion took a single step closer, then stopped again. So close now, Daniel could see the fine scars along the lioness muzzle, old marks of battles fought and survived. He noticed something else, too, an irregular curve along the lioness left ear, a small heel tear that bent unnaturally as if the cartilage had once been crushed. The detail lodged in his mind, strange and intrusive. The lioness remained behind. The male, her body low, but not coiled to strike. Her tail flicked once slowly. The cub sat between her forelegs, eyes wide, watching Daniel with open curiosity rather than fear. A cub. The presence of the young one made everything feel more dangerous and more impossible at the same time. A prey with a cub should have been hyper-aggressive, protective, lethal. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. Easy, he whispered, though his voice cracked so badly it barely resembled speech. Didn't he know why he spoke? Words meant nothing here. The lions did not understand language, only movement, scent, posture. Still, silence felt unbearable, as if the sound of his own voice might remind him that he was still alive. The male lion lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air again. His nostrils flared, drawing in Daniel's scent. Blood, sweat, fear, human. The lioness ears twitched at distant sounds from the grass, but his focus always returned to the man beneath the acacia. Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. Every ranger training he had ever received screamed at him to stay still. Don't provoke, don't challenge, don't run. He lay flat against the earth, hands, visible fingers trembling despite his effort to control them. Minutes passed. The sun dipped lower. Still no tack. Confusion began to creep in, pushing against a raw terror clawing at his chest. Lions did not behave like this. He had spent over 15 years in the field. He had watched hunts from afar, witness the brutal efficiency of these animals when instinct took over. This wasn't instinct, this was restraint. The lioness stood then, her movement smooth and unhurried. Daniel's breath caught painfully in his throat as she stepped closer, stopping just beyond arm's reach. He could smell her now, warm fur dust, the faint copper trace of old kills. She lowered her head toward his injured leg. Daniel nearly screamed. Instead, he clenched his jaw so hard his teeth arched. The lioness sniffed the wound carefully, her whiskers brushing his skin. The sensation sent a wave of nausea through him, fear crashing over reason. Then she did something that shattered every expectation he had left. She lay down, not on him, not over him, beside him. Her body formed a barrier between Daniel and the open savannah, her flank rising and falling inches from his outstretched hand. The cub toddled forward, emboldened now, and sat near her shoulder, peering at Daniel with bright and blinking eyes. The male lion positioned himself at Daniel's other side, facing outward, facing the darkness. They weren't surrounding him, they were shielding him. Daniel's thoughts spiraled wildly. Shock flooded his system, almost eclipsing the pain. His chest tightened, breath coming in shallow, ragged pulls as his mind rejected what his eyes were clearly seeing. This couldn't be happening. Predators did not protect humans. The savannah began to change as night crept closer. Shadows stretched longer, the air cooled slightly, carrying new scents. Hyenas, distant and watchful. Daniel heard their laughter echo faintly across the plains, a sound that usually sent a chill down his spine. Even when he was armed and standing, tonight it sounded like a death sentence. The lions reacted instantly. The male rose to his full height, man lifting as he turned toward the sound. His body language shifted, power rolling through him like a gathering storm. The lioness rose as well, positioning herself closer to Daniel, her cub tucked safely behind her. A deep roar ripped from the male's chest. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. The sound rolled across the savannah, vibrating through Daniel's bones. The hyena calls cut off abruptly, swallowed by the night. Silence returned. Daniel stared up at the lion in erect disbelief. His fear was still there, suffocating, but not tangled with something else. Wonder, confusion, a growing fragile question that made his head spin. Why? His vision blurred as exhaustion and blood loss tightened their grip. Fever crept through his body, making the world shimmer at the edges. He fought to stay conscious, terrified that closing his eyes would be a mistake. He would not wake from. The male lion lowered himself again, sitting a short distance away. His amber eyes met Daniel's steady and blinking. In that gaze, Daniel felt no hunger. He felt judgment and recognition. A memory stirred, faint and disjointed, pushing through the fog in his mind. Years ago, early in his career, a call over the radio about a trapped cub, wire cutting into flesh, a lioness roaring in terror, while he worked with shaking hands to free a tiny, blooded body. Daniel's breath hitched. Dear, the torn curve on the male's ear. No, he whispered the word barely audible. The thought was impossible, absurd. Lions didn't remember humans. Not like this. Not after years, not after distance and time and the ruthless demands of survival. And yet the male lion did not look away. Daniel's strength finally gave out. His eyelids grew heavy, his thoughts dissolving into fragments. The last thing he felt before darkness claimed him was warmth at his side and the low, steady presence of something massive and alive standing between him and the dangers of that night. The last thing he heard was breathing, not his own, theirs. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, suspended in a place where time no longer moved in straight lines. Pain came in distant waves, now dulled by fever and exhaustion, as if his body had decided it could no longer afford to feel everything at once. The world shrank to fragments, the rasp of breath, the weight of the earth beneath his back, the subtle vibration of something large shifting nearby, and memory. It rose uninvited, cutting through the haze with startling clarity. Years ago, Daniel had been younger, leaner, still learning the rhythms of the savannah. Instead of carrying them in his bones, back then he ran toward danger more often than away from it, driven by a mix of stubborn courage and the quiet arrogance of someone who hadn't yet learned how easily the wild could humble a man. The radio call had come in just after dawn, a cub trap screaming. The sound of it still echoed in his mind, now sharp and desperate. Nothing like the roar of an adult lion. It had been thinner, broken, the sound of pain that refused to be ignored. Daniel remembered breaking protocol that day. He hadn't waited for backup, hadn't circled wide or taken time to plan. He followed the sound straight into tall grass, heart pounding every instinct, warning him that a mother lion nearby would kill him without hesitation, and she had been there. He could see her as clearly now as if she stood before him. Again, muscles, taut eyes blazing, her body a living wall between him and her cub. The wire snare had been cry simple, tightened around the cub's head and ear, cutting deeper every time the terrified little body struggled. The cub's left ear had been caught badly, twisted, bleeding. Daniel remembered how his hands had shaken as he raised them, showing empty palms. How slowly he knelt, speaking softly even though his voice trembled. He remembered the lioness's growl vibrating through the ground, the sound so low and full of warning that it seemed to seep into his chest. He remembered thinking very clearly that this might be how he died, but he hadn't stopped. He had reached for his knife, moving inch by inch, cutting the wire with agonizing care. Each scrape of metal against metal had made the lioness flinch, her tail lashing, her patience thinning. Daniel had worked anyway, breath held, sweat stinging his eyes. When the wire finally snapped free, the cub had collapsed, limp and gasping. Daniel had backed away immediately, heart racing, fully expecting the mother to attack. Instead, the lioness had rushed forward, scooping the cub against her chest. Then she had looked at him, not with rage, with something else, something that had followed him all these years without a name. Daniel had left that day alive, shaken, and profoundly changed. He never told anyone how long he had sat afterward, alone in the grass, hands still trembling as the savannah slowly returned to its normal sounds. He hadn't thought much about that day since the reserve had demanded his attention. Poachers, patrols, losses that piled up quietly until grief became a familiar companion, but now lying broken beneath an acacia tree, guarded by lions that should have ended his life, the memory returned with unbearable weight. The ear, the scar. Daniel's eyes fluttered open. The male lion stood a short distance away, half lit by the dying glow of the horizon, his head turned slightly as Daniel stirred, amber eyes locking onto him with calm intensity. The curve of his left ear caught the light of permanent bend where flesh had once been crushed by wire. Daniel's breath stuttered. It couldn't be. 20 years had passed, maybe more. Cubs grew. Cubs disappeared. Survival was never guaranteed in this place. Even fewer males reach full maturity. Fewer still rule territory. Yet the scar was unmistakable. Memory, Daniel realized dimly, was not always written in that mind. Sometimes it lived in flesh. The lion stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Daniel tensed every nerve, screaming despite the fog clouding his thoughts. The lion stopped just beyond him, lowering his head slightly, studying Daniel's face with an unsettling focus. Daniel felt suddenly exposed in a way he never had before. Not prey, not threat. Seen. A low sound rolled from the lioness' chest. Not a growl, not a warning. Something softer, resonant, almost contemplative. "You survived," Daniel whispered hoarsely, unsure why the words came. "You lived." The lion did not react to the sound itself, but something in Daniel's voice seemed to hold his attention. His nostrils flared again, drawing in scent, not just of blood and fear, but of something older, familiar. Daniel felt tears slide into his hairline unnoticed until they cooled against his skin. He laughed weakly, a broken sound that surprised Even him, all this time, he murmured, I thought it didn't matter. That you'd forget that I was just another shape in the grass. The lioness tail flicked once the lioness approached quietly, her movements fluid and confident. She lowered her head again toward Daniel's injured legs, sniffing carefully. The pain flared as her breath brushed his skin, but Daniel forced himself to remain still. When her rough tongue touched the wound, he cried out. Despite himself, the sensation was shocking, sharp, burning, but not violent, deliberate, careful, instinctive. Daniel's hands clenched in the dirt as his mind struggled to reconcile what was happening. This wasn't mercy in a human sense. It wasn't kindness the way people understood it. It was recognition. Something deep within the lioness's behavior mirrored what he had once done. Attending to injury, responding to vulnerability, acting not from dominance, but necessity. The cub watched closely, head tilting as if memorizing the scene. Daniel's awareness flickered again, fading and returning. Each time he surfaced, the pride was still there, always positioned the same way, always vigilant, always between him and the open plains. Hyenas came again in the distance, their laughter carrying on the cooling air. Each time the male rose, roaring them back into silence with effortless authority. Daniel lost track of how many times he drifted into fevered dreams and clawed his way back. Time stretched, curled in on itself. At one point, the male lion moved closer. Then, before sitting near Daniel's head, the heat of his body radiated through the air, grounding him, anchoring him in the present. Daniel opened his eyes and met the lioness gaze again. This time, there was no fear, only a quiet, overwhelming understanding. I didn't save you because I expected anything, Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible, even to himself. I just couldn't leave you. The lion blinked slowly. Daniel's vision blurred once more, but his mind felt strangely clear. For the first time since he felt that chaos inside him eased, he was still injured, still vulnerable, still one mistake away from death, but he was not alone. The savannah held its breath around them as night fully claimed the land. Stars emerged overhead, cold and distant. Somewhere far away, life continued as it always had. Here, beneath one battered tree, a dead older than words was being repaid, not through violence, but through presence. And as Daniel slipped once more into darkness, the last thought that stayed with him was simple and humbling. Some scars do not fade. They remember. Night arrived without ceremony, sliding over the savannah like a living thing. Heat bled from the earth, replaced by a cooler air that carried new sounds, chirring insects, distant calls, movements unseen but deeply felt. For Daniel, night had always been the most dangerous hour on patrol. Darkness erased distance, it hid intent, it gave predators their greatest advantage. Tonight he lay broken beneath an acacia tree, unable to lift his head, unable to defend himself, knowing with absolute clarity that if the lions chose to leave, he would not see the morning. They did not leave. The first stars appeared, faint pinpricks in the darkening sky, and within the male lion rose to his full height. Even injured and half delirious, Daniel felt the shift in the air when it happened. The lioness silhouette expanded against the horizon, man stirring as he turned, slowly surveying the plains with the calm authority of something that had never needed permission to exist. He walked a slow, deliberate circle around the tree. Not restless, not uncertain. A patrol, the lioness moved next, repositioning herself closer to Daniel's legs, her body angled outward, eyes scanning the tall grass. The cub stayed between them, small but alert, copying the adults with exaggerated seriousness. Daniel watched through half-lidded eyes, breath, shallow pain flaring and fading, like distant thunder. Fever tugged at him, pulling his thoughts loose, but some part of him remained fiercely awake, absorbing every detail. The prey was not simply nearby, they were arranged, intentional, guarding. A sound drifted from the darkness, soft at first, then unmistakable. The hyenas had returned. Their laughter crawled across the land, sharp and mocking, growing closer with boldness born from numbers. Daniel's muscles tensed uselessly. He imagined yellow eyes reflecting star-like bodies slipping through grass, patience honed by hunger. The male lion stopped moving, his head lifted, his ears rotated forward. For several long seconds he did nothing at all. Then he roared. The sound tore through the night with such force that it felt physical, a vibration that rattled through Daniel's bones and out across the plains. It was not a warning, it was a declaration. This place was claimed. This life was not available. The hyenas answered at first, voices overlapping, testing. The lion roared again, louder, deeper, and this time the response fractured. One by one, the sounds retreated, dissolving into distance until only the insects remained. Daniel exhaled shakily, unaware he'd been holding his breath. The lion returned to his place near Daniel's head and sat massive and immovable. His presence blocked the wind, held warmth near Daniel's face. The lioness remained vigilant, rising occasionally, a shift positions to check the air, to press her body closer. When Daniel's breathing changed, time lost its shape. Daniel drifted in and out, carried on waves of pain and strange, vivid dreams. In one, he was walking again, strong legs cutting through grass, radio crackling at his side. In another, he was back in the past, kneeling in dust and blood, hands shaking as wire fell away from a cub's torn ear. Each time he surfaced, the lions were still there. At some point, the temperature dropped sharply. Daniel shivered uncontrollably, his body no longer able to regulate itself. He curled instinctively, a small, helpless motion. The lioness noticed. She shifted closer, pressing her flank against his legs, her warmth immediate and overwhelming. The cub followed suit, curling nearer Daniel's side, clumsy but determined, a living knot of heat. Daniel's throat tightened. He had spent his life protecting animals from humans who saw only profit or power. He had believed in distance and rules, in the invisible line that separated respect from interference. Yet here he was, alive only because the wild had decided he belonged beneath its protection. His thoughts wandered to the men who would be looking for him by now, to the silence of his radio, to the fear his absence would cause. He tried to form the image of a search party of boots and dust, of his name carried on the wind. But night was long and help was far away. The male lion rose again in the early hours, pacing, this time his movements quieter, more focused. Somewhere beyond the tree behind, another sound approached, low, heavy, unfamiliar. Daniel's heart stuttered. Buffalo, elephant, something larger. The lioness stood, muscles tensing. The cub pressed close to her, suddenly unsure. The sound grew nearer, then veered off, fading without ever revealing itself. The male lion watched until it was gone, then settled once more, his vigilance unbroken. Daniel realized then that the lions were not acting out of impulse or sentiment. This was strategy, awareness, a decision renewed every minute of the night. They could have left. They chose not to. As the hours dragged on, Daniel's strength ebbed further, his vision narrowed. His thoughts slowed. He felt himself slipping deeper than before into a place where he might not return. Something brushed his cheek, rough, gentle. Daniel forced his eyes open and found the cub investigating him, nose twitching, whiskers tickling his skin. The cub sneezed, startled by his own boldness, then tried again more carefully. A weak smile tugged at Daniel's mouth. Easy, he whispered, though his voice barely existed. I am still here. The cub's ears flicked at the sound, and he settled beside Daniel's shoulder, chin resting awkwardly against him. The male lion watched this quietly, amber eyes reflecting starlight, unreadable and vast. Daniel's awareness fractured again. He felt hands in his dreams, human hands this time, lifting him, voices calling his name. Each time he woke to the same truth: the lions had not moved. When the sky began to lighten, the stars paling one by one, Daniel sensed the shift before he saw it. Dawn crept in, slowly softening shadows, revealing shapes that night had hidden. With the light came bird song. With the light came hope. The lions adjusted, standing, stretching, shaking dust from their coats. The male lion moved a few paces away from Daniel and looked out across the plain's body, angled toward the direction of the ranger station. Daniel followed his gaze, weakly, far off, barely visible. A thin line of movement disturbed the horizon. He didn't know yet what it meant. He didn't know if help was truly coming or if his mind was inventing comfort where none existed. But the lions knew. The male lion turned back once, meeting Daniel's eyes. There was no triumph there, no expectation, only resolve. They had done their part. Through the longest night of Daniel's life, they had stood between him and everything that would have ended it, not because he was prey, not because he was weak, but because once long ago he had chosen not to walk away, and in the language of the wild, that choice had never been forgotten. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped into the savannah, slowly, like a cautious witness, approaching the aftermath of something sacred. Pale light spread across the grass, revealing dew on thorns, dust on leaves, and the quiet geometry of a night that had passed without violence. Daniel was barely conscious when the first human voices reached the clearing. They came faintly at first, murmurs carried by wine, the metallic clink of gear, the unmistakable cadence of urgency, restrained by fear. His name floated toward him, broken and uncertain, as if the land itself were reluctant to give him up. The lions heard it before he did. The male rose immediately, man, catching the early light, his body a dark, immovable line. Between Daniel and the approaching figures, the lioness stood as well, placing herself instinctively closer to the cub, her posture alert, but not aggressive. The cub looked between the adults, then toward the sound, tail twitching. Daniel's eyelids fluttered open. He saw boots first, human boots. Stopping abruptly at the edge of the clearing, he heard a sharp intake of breath. Someone swore under their breath. A rifle clicked, then froze halfway to readiness. No one moved. The scene before them defied everything they had been trained to expect. Daniel lay On the ground, pale-blooded, barely breathing, and around him, not feeding, not circling, not threatening, stood a pride of lions, calm, composed, watchful. Juma was the first to recognize him. "Daniel," he whispered, voice breaking despite years of discipline. "He is alive." Relief surged through the group quickly, followed by terror. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, impossible. One wrong step, one sudden sound, and the clearing could become a massacre. The male lion turned his head slowly toward the rangers. He did not roar. He did not charge. He simply looked at them. There was no challenge in his gaze, no hunger, only an ancient and blinking awareness, as if he were measuring not threat, but intent. Juma swallowed hard and raised his free hand, palm open, a universal gesture that had no business working here. He took one careful step forward. The lion did not react. Another step. Still nothing. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the lion shifted his weight and moved aside just enough to reveal Daniel fully. It was not a retreat. It was permission. The rangers moved quickly after that, but not recklessly. They approached Daniel from the side, keeping their bodies low, their movements deliberate. A medic dropped to his knees, fingers finding a pulse, then nodding sharply. "He is bad," she said, "but he is alive." As they lifted Daniel onto the stretcher, the cub padded forward, curious and unafraid. He reached out with his nose and touched Daniel's limp hand just for a second. No one spoke. The male lion watched closely, muscles coiled, but when the stretcher rose, he stepped back. The lioness followed, guiding the cub with a firm nudge. The pride stood together, now silhouetted against the morning, a living boundary between night and day. When the rangers began to retreat, the lions did not follow. They remained where they were, watching until the humans disappeared into the tall grass, until the sounds faded, until the clearing belonged once more to the land. Daniel woke 2 days later in a medical tent, pain blooming through his body like fire. His leg was bandaged, his veins filled with fluid, his head heavy with questions. Juma was sitting beside him. "You were going to be fine," he said quietly. "You scared the hell out of us." Daniel tried to speak, failed, then tried again. "The lions?" Juma nodded, eyes dark. "We saw them." Silence stretched between them. "They stayed with you," Juma continued. "All night, protected you. We don't have words for it." Daniel closed his eyes. He saw amber eyes in the dark, a scarred ear, a cub's curious face. He felt warmth against his freezing body, heard a roar that had pushed death away. "I know why," Daniel whispered. Recovery was slow, painful, humbling, but as soon as he could walk again, Daniel returned to the savannah, not with a rifle, but with maps, reports, and a quiet fury that sharpened his focus. He retraced his steps, studied trap placements, cross-referenced old patrol data. Patterns emerged. Within weeks, the rangers set their ambush. The poachers returned exactly as Daniel had predicted, confident, careless, unaware that the land itself seemed to be watching them now. The arrests were swift, final. The traps were destroyed. The scars they had left would take longer to heal, but the killing stopped. Months later, Daniel stood on a rise overlooking the plains. His legs still stiff, his body changed forever. Across the distance, a familiar figure stood on a rocky outcrop, the male lion. They did not approach each other. They did not need to. Their eyes met across the space between species, between worlds. Daniel raised his hand. not as a greeting, not as a claim, but as acknowledgement. The lion held his gaze for a long moment, then turned away, leading his pride back into the tall grass. The circle was complete, not because a man had saved a lion, not because a lion had saved a man, but because a choice made long ago, an act of courage without witnesses, had returned to its beginning, closing a bond that time, blood, and fear could not erase. And in that vast, indifferent savannah, something rare had taken root. Trust. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with understanding. What happened on that stretch of savannah was not a miracle in the way people often imagine miracles: loud, sudden, impossible. It was quieter than that, deeper. It was the kind of truth that only reveals itself when fear is stripped away and instinct is given space to remember. At the heart of this story is a simple but powerful lesson. Every action leaves a mark, even when no one is watching. Years before the fallen ranger lay bleeding beneath an acacia tree, he made a choice. He chose compassion over caution. He chose to step toward danger instead of away from it. He chose to save a life that could never repay him, at least not in any way logic could explain, or so he thought. Life has a strange way of returning what we give to it, often when we least expect it, and never in the form we anticipate. The lions did not protect him because they understood laws, gratitude, or morality as humans define them. They protected him because memory lives deeper than language, because trust, once formed in vulnerability, does not simply disappear with time, because the natural world remembers kindness in ways science is still struggling to explain. Another lesson emerges just as clearly. Fear is not the same as truth. Every instinct screamed that the presence of lions meant death. Every rule, every statistic, every survival manual would have supported that belief. And yet, reality unfolded differently. The very creatures humans label as ruthless predators became guardians. The savannah, often portrayed as merciless, became a place of protection. This does not mean nature is gentle. It means nature is honest. It responds not to titles or uniforms, but to intent, history, and balance. The story also reminds us that respect creates boundaries stronger than weapons. The rangers did not survive that morning because they were harmed. They survived because they recognized something sacred unfolding and chose restraint over control. Sometimes the bravest thing a human can do is not to act, but to listen. There is a message here for all of us far beyond wildlife or conservation. In a world driven by speed, profit, and short-term thinking, it is easy to believe that small acts don't matter, that kindness without recognition is wasted, that doing the right thing only counts if someone is there to applaud it. This story gently, powerfully proves the opposite. What you do when no one is watching may one day save you or someone else when everything is at stake. And finally, there is hope. Hope that the bond between humans and the natural world is not broken beyond repair. Hope that coexistence is not a fantasy, but a choice, one act, one decision at a time. Hope that courage rooted in empathy can outlast time, pain, and even fear itself. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or see the world a little differently, then its purpose has been fulfilled. And If you believe like we do that stories like this matter, stories that remind us of compassion, courage, and the quiet power of doing what is right, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep sharing meaningful, true-to-their stories that restore faith in humanity and in the natural world. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about survival, they are about connection, and there are many more waiting to be